Metroid, the pioneer of a whole genre. A series that has left a legacy so strong that continues to influence both developers and gamers to this day. Yet, isn't it kinda sad that Nintendo tends to forget about this series every few years before unexpectedly resurrecting it? I mean, the period of time between Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion was 8 years! Why the hell did it take that long after making one of the best video games of all time? And after Metroid Prime 3, fans had to wait 10 whole years for a game that would be considered good by the grand majority. What about these two? I'll explain things as they develop. But even with that weird attention span that Nintendo has for the series, there's a reason fans adore these games. Because most of them have managed to become timeless classics that are still perfectly playable for today's standards thanks to their peerless quality. So this begs the same question I made some time ago. What's the best one to start with? Before we get to that, we have to answer the root of everything. What is a Metroid? At its core, the Metroid games fall on the action-adventure genres, which are combined with platforming and shooting elements. Metroid gives a huge focus to exploration and item gathering. You know what also defines these games? Non-linearity. You know what else people love about them? The perfect feel and atmosphere of isolation they convey. These are all simple ideas that give these games so much identity. The satisfaction comes from starting weak and vulnerable. Yet as the player progresses, they acquire new power-ups to reach new areas and get stronger to face the dangers ahead. Metroid games aren't exactly long, but thanks to their non-linear structures they get a massive boost in their replay value. This lets the players go through their adventure however they please, from finishing them as fast as possible, to doing it casually, to taking their time to gather every single item to see that sweet 100%. But before we begin I have to clarify, I won't be giving a deep look at the so-called Metroid spin-offs. Why? Because they were not designed with newcomers in mind. And because I can sum them up in a few words. Metroid Pinball. It's pinball. Metroid Prime Hunters. There is absolutely no reason you will ever want to play a game with such a terrible control scheme unless you're a die-hard Metroid fan or a masochist. Metroid Prime Federation Force. That dislike bar on YouTube should tell you more than enough about how fans feel towards this game. So with those three out of the way, let's begin. Metroid on the NES was the game to implement all the ideas I just talked about, so I don't think I need to explain everything once again. This is the beginning of everything, but even if it's the first one, that doesn't mean it's the best place to start with the series. We are talking about 1986, so as you will guess, this game hasn't aged well and its difficulty comes due to being plagued by problems inherent to its time. You know what I mean. Instant enemy respawns, areas that look too similar making navigation confusing, how limited Samus is in terms of movement. Hell, you don't even get a map, so good luck trying to beat this game fully blind. You simply don't have all the conveniences future games will implement. That's not to say Metroid nowadays is terrible. There's nothing wrong with taking a look at the roots of the series, but it's just like I like to say. It takes a special mind to enjoy something this old. Metroid II: Return of Samus is quite an interesting case. This is one of those games that improves on so many aspects from the first game. Graphically, it looks better. The detail in Samus' model is worthy of mention. It introduced so many new upgrades that open new ways to explore and will eventually carry over to future entries, and Samus has much more mobility than in the previous entry. However, this game is held back for reasons that aren't its fault, mainly the limitations of the Game Boy. With a screen this small, you can expect limited vision, but that's only the surface level stuff. One of the reasons Metroid II is considered inferior is because progression is not fully tied to the items you collect. You see, The objective of this game is to eradicate every single Metroid on the planet. While exploring, you will come to dead ends since corrosive liquid will prevent you from progressing. How do you drain it? By eliminating a specific amount of Metroids in said area. This makes Return of Samus compromise its non-linearity that helped the first game to set itself apart. And I mean, that's not the end of the world, because there are other games that are just as linear as this one and are still held up on a pedestal. The problem here is how you progress, because even if they are on the title, fighting the same Metroids over and over will eventually start to wear you down. But again, it's still an enjoyable time all things considered. But remember this is the Game Boy we're talking about. If you can stick with it, hey, I'm not gonna stop you. But as we'll eventually see, there are just many more options waiting ahead. Remember what I said at the beginning of the video? Why the hell did it take that long after making one of the best video games of all time? I wasn't trying to be funny. I meant every single word that I said. This game is an achievement, a pioneer, it's a masterpiece! I love it to a ridiculous level! In fact, it was also one of the first reviews I did on this channel because of that. Even though I hate watching that video now. Except for this part. Yeah, that was a fun part. Super Metroid deserves all the praise it gets, and for good reason. This game is an excellent example of eliminating all the problems from the predecessors while taking all the good things and multiplying them tenfold. The controls are responsive, the movements are smooth, the battles are frantic, the quality of life changes make navigation seamless. The difficulty just keeps adding up as the players get better, and the sense of freedom you get here is insane. Super Metroid is one of those special games that the more you play it, the more you get to appreciate its splendor. It respects the player who is willing to understand it, by knowing how it works, by trying to tackle it in multiple ways, by mastering it. It's impressive how this game pioneered the whole genre, and yet every playthrough manages to feel so fresh and unique. So okay then, is it good for new players? Absolutely! If you want an introduction to the genre, this is one of the best ways to do it. But wait! There's one last thing I have to mention. In Super Metroid, you are told nothing. Knowing your way, finding items, and mastering secret techniques, all of that falls on your shoulders. Does that sound intimidating? Fine, it's okay. There's still a few more games worth looking into. So as I said, between Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion, there was a long 8-year wait. Why did it take that long? I don't know, but I can tell you that Fusion is a worthy successor. There's not much I can add to this one that I haven't said already. Just to keep things short, Fusion does everything good from previous entries while having small new additions. Something that should be highlighted is that of all the series, Fusion is one of the most linear games, because it's split into multiple sectors that only open after you achieve certain objectives. The liberty you used to have that allowed you to sequence break the previous game is pretty much gone. But it's not like this game handholds you the entire adventure. You are told where to go, but how you get there is up to you entirely. At this point, Metroid rarely had any story elements outside of manuals, but Fusion presents much more story and text throughout the entire adventure. But I feel it's very well balanced out to the point where it doesn't feel like it gets in the game. But if there's one thing this game nails, it's the atmosphere. Fusion stands out by giving the player a ceaseless feeling of dread, having them under constant pressure, not knowing when the next menace will approach, forcing them to escape. That's something no other game in the series has been able to replicate as well. Overall, Fusion is a guaranteed great time. It's an amazing sequel, and since it's not that difficult of a game, I will say it's perfect for newcomers. But the next one, ooh, the next one! Metroid Zero Mission. It fucks. Imagine taking all the great things from Fusion, slapping them in the original Metroid, then expanding on everything, ending up with something bigger, better, and faster. In case it wasn't clear enough, Zero Mission is a remake of the first Metroid game. But this is not a one-on-one remake lazily done to give it a new look, because it implements all the conveniences from past entries to effectively eliminate the negative aspects of the original. Power-ups and items that debuted in the past make an appearance here, not only giving Samus more defensive measures and means to explore, but also adding making her as versatile as she was in Fusion. And new areas were implemented, making Planet Zebes feel fresh. But compared to Fusion, how does Zero Mission work for newcomers? Better? Zero Mission is less restrictive with its progression, giving the player more freedom to detour and explore. Just like Fusion, the game is not that hard, and getting lost is a non-issue since you're also told where to go, leaving the path up to you. If there's one game I absolutely recommend you to start with, it's this one. It welcomes new players, it has just the right amount of challenge for them, and it's simply a solid Metroid game, and an outstanding remake. But are you still curious about the rest? Sure, let's see what else lies ahead. How many franchises do you know that can say they have more than one title considered among the best video games of all time? Well, I can tell you Metroid is one of them. Because just like Super Metroid, Metroid Prime does not hold anything back. The first thing that catches one's eye is that Prime is a first-person action game, contrary to the 2D aspects established by its predecessors. But it doesn't go against the Metroid philosophy we are so used at this point. Everything we have known so far changes and adapts to fit this style of gameplay. Talon 4 is a marvel of a setting to explore. It's rich in diverse environments and lore that make it feel alive. The returning power-ups have different functionalities without losing what made them so special. Those changes, combined with brand new upgrades, do an excellent job to spice up the gameplay and make the player feel rewarded. By taking this route, I believe Prime ends up becoming the most immersive game in the series. But that doesn't mean it's the best for newcomers. Before I elaborate on that, let me explain. I won't lose too much time explaining Prime 2 and Prime 3, because at their core, they are similar to Prime 1 in terms of quality and gameplay. But if you want very quick rundowns, Prime 2 is much more confusing, challenging, and has a higher chance to drive you insane. Ever since I first beat it, I said, this is the absolute worst Metroid you can start with. Prime 3, however, is the exact opposite. It's way easier and is the most linear game from the trilogy. I repeat, I consider these three games to be superb. But remember, we are looking at how they welcome newcomers to the series. The Prime games are a near-perfect trilogy because they strike a great balance in story, action, and exploration. Their worlds are filled with so many details, items, and lore, and as a consequence of that, it might be overwhelming for new players. If you want to start with Prime 1, be my guest. You're starting the series with a masterpiece. But if you don't feel ready yet, I believe it's better to try the 2D games and come back to Prime once you feel prepared for something different. Okay, this is a bit awkward. I've mentioned this game in past videos. As a Metroid fan, I'm fully aware of its overall perception by people. But I've never actually played Metroid Other M. That's why I went out of my way to ask as many Metroid fans as I could, so I could get a more concrete idea of why people are hostile to this game. So the conclusions I got were... the story? It fucking sucks. It's stupid. And the fact that they strip away everything that made Samus Returns so cool to begin with was the final nail in the coffin. The gameplay? It's okay. It has cool ideas, a few redeemable aspects, but what I gathered is that it's way too easy to break and it starts to get really repetitive during the second half of the game. The control? It's awful and clunky. Using the D-pad on 3D environments is awkward as hell, and the way in which this game makes you change perspectives is so counterintuitive. The structure? Even more linear than Fusion, pretty much hand-holding you the entire adventure. In conclusion, this game is bad. I am not surprised at all. Not even worth giving it a look from a newcomer's perspective. Even as a veteran myself, I've never felt compelled to play this game at all. If I know my time will be meh at best, then why should I bother? Maybe one day I'll make a full review on it because it's the only drive I'll ever have to play this game. But you never know. Some things are better left forgotten. So after the disappointment that was Other M, Metroid fans had to wait until 2017 for something to fill the void. And that's where Metroid Samus Returns makes, well, a return! Because this game is a remake of Metroid II, going back to its roots by being a 2D side-scroller. This game does to Return of Samus what Zero Mission did for the first Metroid. You know, implementing modern aspects of the series into this game, quality of life improvements, adding new fun mechanics, yada yada yada. It's simply a really good remake. But I don't believe this is a good entry point. Even with the great new additions and fixes, the structure of the game remains the same, meaning the inherent problems of the original are still present here. A linear structure and repetitive battles against the Metroids. But added to that, Samus Returns is one of the most challenging 2D games out there, all things considered. The battles are intense, the enemies hit like trucks even on the standard difficulty, and the game asks for sharper reflexes. It's totally worth a play due to how fun it is, but don't expect it to receive you with open arms if you're a newcomer. So that's it! When you look back at it, Metroid doesn't have that many games considering how long the series has been running. It also doesn't help Nintendo constantly keeps us in the dark about its future. I still don't lose hope. Okay, so to wrap everything up, the benefit of the Metroid games is that thanks to the arena structure, there's no wrong answer on where to start, except for Prime 2 and Other M. But if you were to ask me which route I would recommend, I'd say start with either Super Metroid or Zero Mission. Both are perfect for newcomers, as they will show you the ropes very well. So ask yourself, do you want your adventure to be fully open, where there's more challenge and progression falls entirely on your wits and skill as a player? Or do you want something lighter, something you can pick up and play that will help you from time to time without deviating too much from its roots? After that, I'll recommend you to move to the other 2D Metroid games. And if at any point you want something different, go and play the entire Prime series. That's just my personal opinion though. However you decide to tackle them is up to you. You'll see that almost every single one of them have something unique to offer and set themselves apart. And I hope you have a great time while figuring out why Metroid games are so special. And while you do that, I'm gonna go and wait for Metroid Prime 4 news. Anytime now.